no pre-show banter today. I didn't screw up. I didn't screw up at all. Here we go.
Hey, who? What? Get your hands up.
Stand where you are. Don't move.
Don't reach for them guns.
Take it easy, you galoots. Put away the hardware and relax.
It's Greg.
Greetings, my friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here. And now, for the first time, we are bringing to you the full story of what happened on that fateful day. We are giving you all the evidence based only on the secret testimony of the miserable souls who survived this terrifying ordeal. The incidents, the places. My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer. Let us punish the guilty. Let us reward the innocent. My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about
Radio Misterioso.
Okay, no further ado on this one. Well, I was checking the internets here in the last week after things have been happening, and we'll get into the particulars of it here in a minute, but something happened which will probably be remembered for a while, and for good or bad. I hope mostly for good. And what I'm talking about, of course, is the Roswell slides and what happened with that on Tuesday when it was announced in Mexico City, and there was a big live show done where they charged quite a bit for tickets to see it live. And also it streamed on the internet, and people paid, I think, something around $20 a pop to watch it. None of us know how much money they made, although some of my guests here might have some guesses about what that might be. The upshot is that something that these researchers had, UFO researchers had, for something like 3 years, 2 to 3 years, some images they had that they said were of some kind of non-human being captured on slide film sometime in the late 1940s, possibly 1947 if you were lucky, was legitimate, and that they were going to announced that. It was announced, it was shown, and then within 2 days, the images were released for everybody to look at, and subsequently the images were shown to be other than something extraterrestrial, alien, or non-human. And we will discuss that with my three guests here, and I will stop talking here and introduce, well, I got to keep talking to introduce them, don't I? In order of how they came online here, Curt Collins, Lance Moody, and Paul Kimball, who are all members of a group called the Roswell Slide. What did we call them?
Roswell Slides Research Group. And you can blame Paul for that. We were going to come up with some sort of ridiculous name like, we went over a few things. One was Slide Busters, but, that sounded a little more recognizable to the project at hand. So that's what it's called. And, okay, I'm through talking.
Okay. I was made aware of this group, and I guess added to it a couple of months ago. And when I heard about the Roswell slides, talked to Nick a little bit about it a couple months ago on this show, about what had happened to him. When I was asked about it, I said, nothing will happen with this. Believers will believe it. Non-believers won't believe it, or skeptics, or whatever you want to call them. And things will continue just as they have been, and both sides will hold up the evidence to show that it's either true or false. But what happened in the last few days is that just about everybody, including people who are 100% ETH believers, have decided that the images were not of any kind of extraterrestrial anything. And maybe somebody can start with how that happened. Oh, Red Pill Junkie is listening to, and he said he will come on and talk when we get him on the line here, because he was actually at that presentation in Mexico City live, sitting there in the theater. And Paul, and I guess maybe a couple of you other guys might want to ask him a couple of questions. So maybe somebody can take us through what happened, as far back as you want to go, either before the unveiling, as it's called, Mexico City, and subsequent events after that, or wherever you want to start.
Hey, can I start? I might fade out, and the guys can pick it up. I'm
okay,
so tired.
Curt. Yes, Curt.
So the thing is, there's a bunch of us that had common interests, and I got on Facebook to sort of connect with friends, and really just to get email addresses. And all of a sudden, it's like I guess it became addictive. So, and then there was a lot of noise in groups, and I came up eventually with this, a little clubhouse, almost like a Facebook pub, just friends. We call it the Dissident UFO Buffs, and we're just hanging out, and it's a lot of joking around. Share some research, but it's mostly some conversation. We'll just say that.
Yeah, sharing common interests, like you said.
The slides started being discussed, and there were people in there from all you guys were in it, and also some folks that I met from around the world, and we'll name a bunch of those later. One in particular, a friend from Spain, and I'll probably mangle his name, Jose Antonio Caravaca. That's as close as I can come with it. He writes a little English. I don't know that he speaks any, and our communication isn't really that wonderful, but I get the meaning and I have to translate some things. But he sent me a message and said, hey, why don't we, there's a lot of information coming about about this slides thing. And several of the members, particularly Paul Lance and Mr. Fernandez, because I couldn't say his name right, go back with
Gilles Fernandez.
Okay, great. Go back for some years with us and followed it. But, when the announcement was made in, I think it was sometime in November at I think Tom Carey spoke at this American University event. He was invited to talk about Roswell, and out of the blue, in an otherwise serious academic presentation, at least as much as you can while talking about UFOs, he blurted out that they had the smoking gun of UFO evidence, proof of alien life crash at Roswell, and it was 2 images, and they would be announcing it in February. And it was sort of a press. He announced they were going to have a press conference to announce an event. So it's sort of like some kind of a long, elaborate tease. So anyway, we started talking about it. Jose suggested putting the group together, and so that's we did, and started swapping information, and really started snowballing from there.
Well, how did it snowball? I mean, I know that everybody saw the images beforehand a little bit. Most people that were of a skeptical mind said, well, this really doesn't prove anything. I kind of said that. Oh, the other thing I wanted to add was that the reason I decided to pay attention to it at this time was, one, I didn't realize it would be so easy to figure out how earthly and mundane the picture was. As Lance told me earlier, a lot of these things usually become nebulous, and it's really hard to get any kind of definite handle on them for everyone, or at least a majority. And that was one reason I wanted to talk to you guys. And 2 is because I happen to know two or three of the people in the group, and they've been on my show. So it's kind of imperative almost that I pay attention to this. So the image was released, but it wasn't released publicly clearly at first, was it? It was just shown at the unveiling, as it were, last Tuesday.
Yeah, they released this sort of trailer video that's sort of done in a movie style.
Oh yeah,
and
I remember.
And they released this thing, and you got sort of glimpses of these slides, but it was intended that you'd never really see the thing. So as soon as they released that, I think Tim Printy, this is Lance speaking. I think Tim Printy told me that this trailer was out. As soon as it was out, I went and looked at it, and I saw that you got just a quick glimpse of the slide. So I quickly went in there and got a still frame of that, and I sort of tried to reconfigure it so it was back to its slide format, its 4x3 format. And I sent that to Rich Reynolds, and he put it up immediately. So this is all within an hour of the thing being released. Now, my version of that was pretty crappy. I mean, it was terrible. But somebody else, I think in Germany, discovered that they had not blurred out a better image, a higher quality image. And that image sort of became our go-to image for what was in the slide. And that was a fairly good image, but we were promised by the promoters that we couldn't see details that were really important. We couldn't see the alien details because, frankly, it looked sort of like a mummy, like a human mummy. And that's what we all thought when we saw it. But they assured us that there were things we couldn't see in our low-quality frame grab that we were going to see later. So I don't know if you want to tell some more of the story there, Paul.
Sure. Yeah, it's after that there were things started leaking out. I've contrasted this on the internet over the last day or two with how we operated. We opened as soon as we had all this stuff over the last few days. We open sourced it. It's available on the group's website that I set up. Lance didn't, and Tim Printy both did. Here's how we de-blurred the placard kind of thing. We were cooperating fully with each other. So if one person had a piece of information, he shared it with the rest of the group. Now contrast that with how the slides promoters, and I agree with Lance, I wouldn't call them researchers anymore. I'd call them promoters, have operated over the last 3 years. Secrecy, even amongst themselves, they weren't apparently telling, the left hand didn't necessarily know what the right hand was doing. Some people might have some information, other people might not have other information, which is madness. That's not how you conduct research, certainly not at this level anyway. So as time went on, certain pieces of information sort of leaked out or dribbled out. One of them was the mistake, and I'm sure it was a mistake that Adam Dew, the filmmaker, and I hesitate to use that term, but whatever. As a professional filmmaker, I hesitate to use that term, but the filmmaker, he let that slide slip, if you will, which is what Lance was talking about. A little while later, I got information from a source who may or may not have been Rich Reynolds as to the name of a heretofore anonymous quotation marks witness that they featured in the trailer, who had also been featured on sci-fi documentaries previously. And in the trailer, Adam Dew claimed that this man was a lieutenant, or as we would say in Canada, lieutenant, stationed at Roswell in 1947 who had seen the alien bodies. Well, once we had that piece of information, it was very easy for us to determine quickly who that guy was. Tim Printy found his picture in the base yearbook. We determined that he was not a lieutenant. He was a private, a PFC. So the dude was either lying or he was inaccurate, one or the other. And so this went on for a period of about 2 or 3 months, I think, after that initial trailer came out, until the May 5th sort of reveal, where it's kind of like the fall of the Berlin Wall. You sort of think, well, communism's never going to fall, and then suddenly, boom, it's gone. Because I suspect the promoters had this idea that, as we say in the entertainment business, there would be a very long tail for this, that they would be able to milk the revenue streams for years on this. And yet, within a matter of really 2 or 3 days, it's done. I know Jaime Maussan.
Yeah, and we had been waiting. We had been waiting months too, because I think the announcement and when the trailer came out, that was either like perhaps February or January.
Right.
I can't remember.
Early February, yeah.
And then it was on that day that we found out, oh my God, it's going to be May 5th. So we gotta listen to this crap for 4 or 5 more months. So we were waiting and talking about the thing the whole time, trying to cover little details that we'd get. The people in our group would sort of try to search down. That we didn't have a lot because they were hiding a lot of the information. So by the time of the actual release, we had a lot of anticipation. And I think during that time period, Paul, am I right that you sort of got disinterested in the whole thing? I think you had a lot of stuff going on with the politics of Nova Scotia, where they were going to cut funding for filmmakers there, and you were attending to that. And if I'm not mistaken, you even left our group for a little while. So the night of May 5th, we were – yeah, well, the night of May 5th, we were all sitting around. And I wrote to Paul. I said, you need to come in here because we're watching this thing now. We were watching the feed and making fun of it. And I told Paul we were being inappropriate. And he came right back and spent the night with us doing that, which was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah, I thought I agree. I wanted to back up a little bit and give people who didn't know exactly what was going on here kind of a background of the slides were apparently offered to this group of UFO researchers a couple years ago. Nick had told me on my show, Nick Redfern, before that somebody had called him first, who he never found out who this person was, somebody from Texas, and said that he had images on slides of the alien from Roswell, and he wondered how much money he could get for them.
Right. There was a lot of mythology coming out, and there's some names I don't particularly want to use, but there was one source in particular who gave the whole narrative over the time, and we were pretty much promised, said, okay, this couple, they're mysterious, they're highly connected, they know the Eisenhowers, and later on the story changed where apparently they knew the Bushes as well, and it was like a spy novel, and supposedly the narrative changed too. Originally, it was that the geologists discovered the bodies in an expedition, and then later they said no, it must have been a secret base, and because of the wife's high military connections, they were allowed access. So there were some odd things like that, and it was very difficult to verify any of the claims about the individuals and make the connections to put them in Roswell, or it seemed like a house of cards, or maybe it seemed like you drew some dots and then connected them.
Yeah, this was the people were Bernard and Hilda Ray, I believe, was the proper names.
Well, even before that, David Rudiak said today that they told him that the woman was somehow friends with the first White House photographer. But that story got dropped somewhere along the way. Don't know, it was done in what I could only call a UFO way. The whole thing was done like most UFO stuff is done. Sort of, you can't pin it down. You can't get any real information, and it's not. It's simply not research. It's wishful thinking and dreaming. And God bless them. They really messed themselves up on this one.
Well, you can see an example of that. I kind of left because of the personal attacks that I was getting, and I'm not going to get into that. But I had sort of put this joke out about a month and a half ago on my blog where I said, look, I've been given from an inside source the slides. I have high-res copies of the slides. And on May 4th, I'm going to release them on a live televised event for free. You can watch them the day before the Mexico City thing for free. Well, that annoyed an awful lot of people who had an awful lot of money at stake, and I'm surprised anybody took me seriously. I mean, honestly, folks, this sort of shows how
you're missing part of it, because you said that that the details would be released in early April, and
yes, exactly.
that was a tell, and I think as early as you can get in April is the 1st, and I think that's what this was really all about.
But the interesting thing, I was just having some fun with these people, because if you can't have some fun with people, why bother? But I was also looking for information, too, because I thought if you threw this out there, maybe some information would come back. And a little bit did. Adam Dew, the chief slides promoter, for instance, said that, well, this is impossible because only 3 people have ever seen high-res copies of the slides. And almost immediately, Anthony Bragalia, who's another one of the slides promoters, said, well, actually, it's 6. And at that point, something in the back of my mind clicked, and I said, you know what, these people can't even agree on how many people have actually seen the slides.
Did they not have a non-disclosure agreement with the filmmaker or not?
Well, who would the non-disclosure agreement be with? Because
do we want to tell about who owns the slides? The company, sure. And who's in it? Okay. In the film, they there's a story about this woman cleaning a house. Well, if they don't name, actually a dude named her accidentally. He called her Cat, and I think that slipped out. Well, and looking at the Slidebox, we scratched for a lot of things. It's Slidebox Media LLC, and in their papers, it indicated that Do Media and also. There was another company name. Anyway, the other name that eventually surfaced was Joseph Beeson. And I have a whole stack of things where I trace from one thing to another, including an obituary that connected him. But Joseph Beeson's sister is Catherine Cecilia Beeson. She lived in Sedona, Arizona. She's the one that discovered the slides. She sent them to her brother, Joseph. And his connection, apparently he's friends with Dew, but he developed Dew's sport the website for whatever his video thing was. And I also found a website that he had developed for somebody else, and it was whatever, I don't know the technical details, but the structure for the website was virtually identical for the Slidebox media. It was like whatever template they used, there were fingerprints from one to the other, and they were clearly connected.
Yeah, Slidebox media is the website and presenting entity for the Roswell slides too, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And
okay,
then,
I'm just trying to make things clear for people that aren't 100% clear, like me, actually, on the sequence of events. Go ahead.
Oh, well, then the other thing was the clincher was, and actually I've told part of this out of order, but the information's all valid, even if I'm jumbling up the order. Jaime Maussan, in his broadcast from Mexico, a Sunday morning television show, mentioned when they were getting ready for the show, he said that the actual slides would not appear in Mexico City. And, he didn't specify it, but obviously they were going to bring digital copies. And I thought, well, that's like bringing a picture of the Shroud of Turin or a picture of the Mona Lisa to a gallery rather than the object itself. And the whole thing was called Be Witness. But anyway, the point I mentioned, the reason I mentioned that, although it is an important point, he said it would remain with Joseph Beeson. And from there, we said, okay, and this man's identity has otherwise been hidden, and I think that was a slip. So I don't know that it's important, but it seems important that it's hidden. And I think since the way this is played out, these people need to be identified, and we're going to try to hold them accountable.
And I think we may have skipped over just the idea of when they did the announcement of how they were actually going to release the slides. They made it clear that it was going to be a big event. It was going to be a theater event as well as live streaming. It was going to happen in Mexico City. And we, at that time, I believe, found out that the ringmaster of this was going to be Jaime Maussan, who is a notorious UFO journalist, so to speak, in Mexico, a guy that's promoted a lot of things that are extremely questionable, flying horses and stuff like that, and a guy who's promoted video that is much clearer than the slides of aliens and stuff, that just all kinds of stuff like that, where why would you even need the slides if you've got this great alien footage? And I think the reason is because nobody really believes that video is real either. So we found out that he was the ringmaster, and everyone on every level of UFO belief all thought, well, Jesus, Jaime Maussan, that's the wrong person to do something that's, going to be scientific supposedly.
That was a red flag for a lot of people, yeah, including me. I mean, Maussan, I think, lost any credibility a long, long time ago. He's a showman. He's not a researcher.
Yeah, that's the polite way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, even you can look at it. Even Stan Friedman. I don't want to pick on poor Uncle Stan, but Stan has gone to a lot of things, including X conferences and the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure. So perhaps he's not the most discriminating person about who he shares a stage with. And even Stan, when asked to appear in Mexico City, took a look at the slides and said, "No, there's nothing about these that look alien to me." So
it wasn't just the picture, that was the story. There was nothing to connect it to Roswell.
Well, there were the two things, and sort of subsequently talking to him, I think those were both the two things. The story didn't make any sense, that was clear. But the pictures themselves, if you just looked at even the ones we had, you would say there's absolutely nothing about this that would indicate alien. And there's further, as you say, Curt, nothing that would indicate a tie-in, even if it was an alien, to Roswell. So everybody was staying away from Mexico City, except the people that got on the stage at Mexico City. So those are the ones that, at the end of the day, plus throw in Anthony Bragalia, who didn't travel, but he was one of the key slides promoters. There's a very small group of people that can be easily identified who were responsible for promoting these things. And, within a couple of days after that, thanks to, not good work by me, I'm just the PR guy, but thanks to good work by our friends in France, frankly, Nab Latour and Gilles Fernandez, Jose Caravaca, who had a contact somewhere that gave him a copy of the slides, and then eventually gave us a copy, put up a copy that we could replicate the results with. Tim Printy and Lance Moody went and replicated the results and made videos available that I could put up that would show anyone how to do it. I mean, within a matter of 2 or 3 days, it's like, this is done, this is over. And here's how you can prove it yourself, sitting in your own living room in front of your laptop.
Okay, one of the listeners asked if you, Paul, had talked to Stan Friedman before he made his announcement that he wasn't going.
No. In fact, I heard about Stan. Somebody, I think it was Don Schmidt, had actually indicated after Stan said he wasn't going to go that Stan had been gotten to, my terms, but that was the gist of it, by somebody on our team. Now, there's only one person that, everybody would look to me because we're related. I think I read it on Frank Warren's website. And then when I found out, I sent Stan a note and said, is this true? And he came back and he said, yeah, I'm not going. And I said, could you confirm yet again why you're not going? And he sent me another email, and that was it. And I put a post about it, and I published his email because he said I could. And that was the end of it. But no, I didn't talk to him beforehand at all. And for the record, I've also not called Edgar Mitchell. Lance knows what I'm talking about. So.
Yeah, Edgar Mitchell, I thought they said was going to show up there, but he showed up by video feed or something.
Well, that's true. In fact,
we're going to have to ask Red Pill here. Go ahead.
Oh, one of the things is, other than the slides not being there, Edgar Mitchell did not appear in person, and the person that was supposed to introduce him, who, I could skip, but, Dr. Carol Rosen, she was supposed to be there. So those were prominently listed, and if you paid to see them, then I didn't think you got your money's worth. But that's not the most serious problem in this. But I want to mention, before we get too much on the slides and the placard, the earliest investigation was in the blurry leak that Lance was talking about. We had this image and said, well, what is this and what does it show? And there's the body, but it's also the surroundings. There's no military gear of any sort, and looking at it, some of the details are clear, others are not, but it's clearly a glass display case. And the analysis of the slides promoters, they said this appeared to be something hastily constructed, looked like it was made out of an erector set material, and it was an army blanket that the body was lying on, and I forget what some other deal, but it was like it was a scenario where it was in a set in tent. Well, there's this placard that seems to be identifying it, that they said was handwritten, and even in the poor copy that we had, it was apparent that there were some other objects beyond the body, and we couldn't tell what they were, but it looked like they also had some type of a label, and it made no sense for the military or the scientific examination. It just, if you had an alien Roswell body, one of our members, who goes by the name of Trained Observer, he said early on, he said, if you have this precious biological example of alien life, even in mid-1940s, they knew enough that they would contain that, and that every cell of it would be precious to examine, and they wouldn't leave it out in the open, So there was just every time where you listen to the story, what they said about the images, what about the people involved, there was like a disconnect of logic.
Yeah, their sort of story there was that they surmised that this Hilda Blair Ray had been highly connected in some way, and that allowed her to get close to somehow take a picture of the alien body. And they made claims that were so dumb that you had to just wonder, what is going on? Because one of the things they said was, and this was said just by their most their loudest promoter, said that we've definitely determined that this was taken in 1947. And it's like, well, how do you determine when a photograph is taken? You might possibly be able to determine when it was processed, but how can you determine when it was taken?
You can determine when the film was manufactured. I think that's about all you can do.
Well, they got into this thing where we knew they had an expert, and somehow the name of one of the experts was mentioned somewhere online. And I saw that, and I called the guy, and I spoke with him. And he told me, he said, you cannot tell precisely when the film was even manufactured. You can't tell it precisely. We did use a coding system, but you can't rely on that.
Oh, okay.
Well,
because they repeated it every 10 years, I think.
Well, even that is unclear. None of that.
Okay.
He never said that.
All right.
And then I later found out that he was their man, and I found out that he was under a non-disclosure from them. So maybe he was just telling me, because he did tell me he didn't know anything about the slide, but I know now that he probably did. So I sent him an email, and I said, I know you may be under NDA, but can you tell me, was what you told me accurate? And he wrote me back and said, you cannot accurately tell when film was manufactured, something along those lines. Now, I shared that with everybody. I shared it with the guys on the team. I shared it with Tony. I shared it with anybody who asked me about it. I let them know. But they never changed the narrative. They still pretended that they knew that the slide had been taken in 1947, and they need it to be 1947 because they want to somehow connect it to Roswell, which is so sad how pathetic their attempt to do so was.
It gets even worse because you would find little things that everybody brings a different skill set to a certain thing. Like, Lance is a film editor. So he brings a certain skill set. I mean, we all have different skill sets and myriad skill sets, but I was trained as an historian when I was a kid. As soon as somebody sticks into the narrative that, they were close friends with Dwight Eisenhower, which was unproven, but even assuming that they were, and somehow Ike would have allowed them in to view the alien body and take, getting even worse, pictures of it, any historian. And there was a historian standing on the stage in Mexico City, so I'm directing this at him. Any historian would immediately know that the guy who oversaw the invasion of Normandy with the kind of secrecy that left the Germans wondering where the Allies were going to land and when was not the kind of guy that would invite a golfing buddy, or even his brother for that matter, in to see the biggest secret, 2 points higher than the H-bomb, remember, of all time. So when you would see pieces of the narrative, you would be able to look at the film and you would say, look, this doesn't make sense. The photo doesn't make sense. You'd hear parts of the story and somebody else might chime in. That's ridiculous. It was a house of cards just waiting to be pulled apart, and they couldn't see it. And I think they believe, the ultimate thing is whether they're frauds or whether they're believers who are just naive, who knows? But it's their lack of faith in the intelligence of your average person that they thought that people would actually go with this, even within ufology. So this house of cards was waiting to be pulled down, and as soon as the images became available after May 5th, it didn't take very long. And, Lance is the best one, I think, here to describe that process of how they went about de-blurring it.
I want to talk about some of the other work that we've done because, we'll keep that part in suspense. The first thing that we really tried to do was identify the mummy. We said, okay, do mummies look like this? And we found, well, this looks like this. It's characteristic, it's got this, it looks like the rib cage is sunken, and it looks like a shriveled, desiccated, mummified body. And we said, okay, well, can we match that? And we found a very good match. It was originally in the Wistar Museum. It was called Specimen 2397. Moved in 1958 to the Smithsonian Institute, and Dr. David Hunt, who is still in charge of it, he did an extensive scan of it sometime in the last decade or so. And so we had, I don't know what that was, CT or MRI. So basically we had a view of it inside and out, the skeletal structure. And it was the thing that really didn't seem to match was the head, but they said the alien's head was detached, this mummy's head was detached, so it was possible that the angle of the photograph and the photograph itself is somewhat blurred from motion, so we couldn't be certain of that. But there were so many compelling similarities to the position of the body, the chest cavity. In fact, up until after we saw the actual images, some of our members were convinced it was 100% match. It was that close. And what we learned from that is it was not an alien body. You could compare, and we had, like I said, we had the skeletal scan, and there's the thigh that matches everything matched but the skull. And then we took, well, okay, we got this close. Well, let's look at some child skeletons. So, there's some of those that are photographed in museums, and we compared that. And relatively late in the game, Tim Hebert joined, and he earlier Tim Prenty had done some comparisons. We got Tim to check, and he said, yeah, this is a body. What's in the mummy that, the crappy image we had, you can tell this is a child's body. And we don't know where it is, where it came from, but the dimensions all match. And that was a certainty almost from the beginning. And what we thought we had to do was find that particular mummy. And we continued to do that up until May 7th, something like that. Okay, I'm done with that.
Yeah, everybody was looking so carefully. And I remember that Isaac Coy, if that's the proper way to say his name, he did some really great work in collecting documents related to mummies and so forth, photographs that we looked at, and he's really a treasure in the whole field of. If you're interested in UFOs at all, because he's also separately collected so many documents and curated so many documents related to the whole history of the subject that he really is a treasure. He's one of the greatest assets of the whole field. And so are we telling this? I can't tell, Greg, if we're kind of laying this out properly or if we're jumping all around.
Yeah, I don't know if you are. I was kind of thinking maybe we can bring Red Pill in and he can describe what he saw at the actual presentation, because he paid for it and he was actually there. Do you want to call him now, or do you want to talk to him a little bit after this? Because I can get him on the line now.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. Let's see if he pops in here.
Well, while we're waiting for him, one of the things I want to say is, I mentioned earlier about the international group.
Yeah, he's on here.
Hello.
Go ahead, Curt.
I just wanted to say, some people said, it's a bunch of rabid debunkers. No, it's a group of friends with a diverse set of beliefs and interests. All of them have a serious interest in UFOs, one way or the other. Some of them are definitely skeptical. I think Lance will freely admit that. And our friend Stephen Miles Lewis, I think he calls himself an anomalist or more of a Fordian. Yeah. And there was a spectrum of beliefs. And so I think. It skewed skeptical, but, it was, I don't know. We could probably find a better scientific team, but it was a great team of friends. That's how we got started.
Yeah. Some of the people on the team actually, used to kind of turn me off and frighten me a little bit. And when I realized what their thinking process was and what they were trying to do, I looked past that. It's like, look, this is something that's important. And no matter what you think of these people's opinions about UFOs or ufology or anything, what they've done is important, and what they've done makes sense, and it makes sense to a majority of people. So why be scared of something that gets at the truth like that? Because we need more of that. Meanwhile, Red Pill has come on, and are you there?
Buenas noches.
Hey.
Hello.
Hello. This is actually the first time I've talked to Greg before. It's nice meeting all of you and to hear your voice. So Red Pill, is that what we're calling you today?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We want the perspective from Mexico. We want to know how this was advertised, how this was pitched, and how the civilians there, how they reacted and the excitement beforehand.
Well, how it was pitched, I think you know already. Maussan claimed that this was going to be the event that will change the course of history, right? Mm-hmm. And after the first image was leaked on the internet, I think he definitely was not pleased about it, and he decided to do some kind of management, trying to fix the problem by engaging in a very dramatic and very aggressive advertising campaign. I listened to him on several radio interviews that he gave promoting the event, how telling that the images were definitely not of a mummy, right?
And these were all in Mexico on Mexican media, right?
Well, not all of them, because I also listened to one interview that he gave to a radio program from Argentina.
Oh, okay.
And that was particularly interesting because in that interview he debated your friend Jose Caravaca.
Wow.
Who managed to really make him completely lose his temper. The poor radio host trying to calm Maussan down and say, "Señor Maussan, please calm down," and Maussan, completely losing his temper and saying, about the grotesque image that the skeptics had managed to obtain. And he also even accused the skeptics, I think that's you guys, of altering and tampering the image. He said that the image that you guys had looked like Tweety from the Warner Brothers and all that. Yeah, and that he was going to he was complaining and say, how come the skeptics are attacking us even before they give us the chance to show the evidence? That was like his main gripe, his main peeve. And he said that when Caravaca mentioned to him that even Adam Dew himself wasn't really 100% sure that the body shown in the slides were not of some kind of mummy, he again lost his temper and said, Adam Dew's opinion is irrelevant. What's relevant is the opinion of the experts. The forensic experts that are going to present the evidence are going to point out to the 43 abnormalities in the body that show without a shred of a doubt that it doesn't belong to a mummy or even a human being.
How much were tickets to this thing?
The prices ranged widely, between, the most expensive ones were like 1,300 pesos, like that's like $86.
Uh-huh.
After that, 950 pesos, $63. The ones I bought were on the balcony. That were about $50, and from then the others in the galleys, from $30 and $20.
How many people do you think were there? It was a 10,000-seat auditorium, but how full was it?
That's right. It was not entirely full, but almost. I think it's fair to say that between 6,500 and 7,000 people were present at the live event.
Wow.
Mm.
That's a lot.
And how did they respond to the presentation?
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to say that the reaction was overall very, very positive. I mean, people cheered, people clapped,
Wow.
A
particular question. One of the things that was really and it is supposed to be so exciting was that we were going to see the alien come to life with a hologram. Now our presentation was on a flat screen and we didn't get the experience. What did it look like?
From the angle in which I was seeing the presentation, like I said, I wasn't at the balcony, so I was seeing it from on one of the corners of the hall. So from that perspective, the alleged holographic effect was completely lost. I guess what I was expecting was something like the alien, joining Tupac and all of them, making a concert and starting to sing. And Jaime Maussan, dancing with them, but it was just like the alien moving around, kind of like seeing the audience and trying to take a few steps and all that. Not even a decent animation walking cycle, And in my opinion, it was kind of like the lowest point in the presentation. I think it took too long. I think with 30 seconds or more, it would have been enough. But it took maybe more than 2 minutes. At what point? I mean, it was almost midnight when that happened. I think I was particularly tired. I was like ready to move on, right?
Were you surprised at how long they took to actually get to revealing the slides? Because when we were watching the thing, we could not believe how long they waited. It was like, oh my God, it's 2 hours now. When are we going to get to the meat of the thing?
Yeah, I didn't expect the whole event to last that long. You know, in retrospect, I suppose that if they had just, shown the image and then move along and maybe the whole thing had lasted like less than 45 minutes, it would have even bothered me more, right? Than the fact that it took so long. It would have been. I would have felt that it was more of a ripoff. At least like this, I felt like I got more bang for my buck, right? But I didn't really feel that they were dragging the whole thing, 3 hours, like you said, and they still didn't show it. On the one hand, I tried to rationalize it by saying, okay, so maybe they really need to put all the people in the audience up to speed, with the general overview of the Roswell case, because presumably the Mexican audience wouldn't be as knowledgeable about all the characteristics of the case, who Mac Brazel was, who Jaime Maussan was, and all that, as the people in the United States. So on the one hand, I kind of thought, well, maybe there's a point to all of this, but some aspects of the presentation, like, bringing someone like James J. Hurtak, to give a very dramatic speech, like, brothers and sisters, take your position and claim your future and all that for a future in peace in space and all that, like, okay, and then
and a lot of rainbows too.
Yeah, and then Mr. Paul Hellyer, the former Prime Minister of Canada, former Minister of Defense of Canada.
Yeah. Yes, not true, not Prime Minister.
Yeah, sorry, Paul.
It's bad enough we let him run our military. We didn't let him run the country.
And then when they finally got around to showing the image, they did it with zero art. They sort of stuck it up there real quick, and then they slid it back and forth a couple of times, and then done. And it was, and our jaws were on the ground. We couldn't believe that this was the presentation, because first off, we immediately knew that this is the same, there's not really much more in this image that we couldn't already see, not at least in this initial look at it. It was later on that we saw details that, I guess we'll talk about those in a moment, but we started to see other details. But it was I was looking forward to seeing something that made me think alien, and that was what I asked several of the people who saw the thing, like Larry L., who saw it, and he never really answered. Yeah, he never answered why because he was one of the early people who gave a description of the thing. He never gave any indication that he thought it looked more human than alien. He tried to keep the ooga booga going, and I feel like that those kinds of people also were complicit in promoting this thing, in helping promote it. And then when Tim Printy did some measurements of the slide that we had, Larry was right in there with his anti-opinion of what Tim had done. But never did I see him write anything negative about the slides. And so it was amazing to me just how we were surprised at how terrible it was presented, that it didn't – we were like, what? That's it?
Yeah. So Red Pill, it didn't really convince you either? Or you said most of the audience kind of enjoyed it, but you felt like it was there wasn't really enough analysis of the actual slide. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, if he had just shown the slides, like that, and say, okay, see, these are the slides.
Yeah, more than one, sorry.
I wouldn't have given it much thought. I would have just, convince myself, okay, that's just a mummy. I don't know. I don't care what Maussan says. But then he presented these forensic experts, beginning with the guy, what's his name? José de Jesús Salce Benítez.
Uh-huh.
And then Richard Doble, who is the only expert who spoke in English. And then Dr. Luis de Antonio de Alba Galindo. And then, the first one, Salce, was the one that who really, really gave me some pause, he sounded proficient enough, professional enough, giving all this technical jargon, explaining, according to him, point by point, why the body in the slides didn't really correspond with any of the genetic syndromes, recognized by the World Health Organization, and all these kinds of malformations that could explain it. According to him, neither of those explanations didn't really fit to explain all the alleged abnormalities that he observed in the slide.
Part of the reason that you suffered is because of what the challengers did. Jose confronting Maussan, and they reacted. And one of the things we know is from their original presentation, they added a lot of speakers, and one of them was they tried to recruit Stanton Friedman. They recruited Richard Dolan, and they padded the program. And you mentioned Hertag. He was a very last-minute addition. I think they wanted to get some people with PhD. And you mentioned Dobble. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce his name. We tracked some information on him. He went to the University of Toronto. And he was a classmate of Thomas Carey. So, it's an old school.
I think I read that in Gilles Fernandez' website or somewhere else. Yeah,
and he was the one who said that he could tell just by looking at the slide that the being in the slide had evolved as a reptile, like a gecko, right?
Yeah.
Who can listen to that? And now, especially knowing what we know now, how do we ever listen to when someone presents someone as an expert and say, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's an expert. Let's listen to what he has to say."
Oh, that's a very good point. We have all the material from 3 years, all the promises were made about it, the experts that they presented, and we know what they have. And we can compare what it's all out in the open now. You cannot reasonably believe every one of these people was so severely mistaken. There has to be, the level of ineptitude is incredible. There's no way to believe that's all a mistake.
Red Pill, it's Paul Kimball here. Let me, first of all, thank you for the review. Thank you for the review of my book a couple of years ago. I just wanted to get that on the record. And I wanted to ask you, because you were there, and if you were watching it live, most of the attention would be on the stage, whether the speakers or the images. And only fleetingly would you get glimpses of everybody else who was kind of on the stage but not speaking. What were the reactions of, in particular, Richard Dolan, who was one of these last-minute additions? As he saw everything kind of unfold, did you sort of clock that, take notice of that?
Sure. And also let me point out to you guys that I didn't attend the event alone. I asked one of my cousins, my cousin Fernando, who was also had a lifelong interest in the UFOs. I asked him to join me, and I did it for two reasons. One, because I didn't want to go alone, especially return alone at such late hour of the night, Mexico City being what it is. And the second is because I wanted to have the opinion of someone who is interested in the topic, who is smart, well, as my cousin is, and who wouldn't be contaminated, let's just say, with all the innuendo and all the controversy which were already surrounding the slides on the internet. I knew that my cousin wasn't aware that the slides had already been leaked. So I didn't even want to mention that to him. I wanted to see his unfiltered reaction to the whole thing. And let me just point out that when the whole thing ended and we were, going back to where his car was, because he was going to give me a lift back home, and I asked him, what do you think of it? Were you convinced about it? And he said that he found everything to be very interesting, and he was particularly impressed by the words of Dolan. He also, like Dolan, hoped that the slides will have some kind of quote unquote ripple effect that will manage to get like the ball rolling and start to erode the wall of silence that Dolan thinks is concealing the secret, of UFOs, and moving towards the post-disclosure society that he ambitions, right? So, for what I can say, my cousin was impressed by Richard Dolan, and I suppose that most of people were also impressed. The fact that most of them decided to stay and listen to him, after 5 hours, when they could have just, stood up and walked, after all, the big presentation was already over. They had already seen the slides. There was no real reason for them to linger and listen to Dolan, but most of them did.
Yes.
What? Go ahead.
How did he look when he was on stage? Because of all the people, he was sort of the last one invited, but he also had to sit there for 3 or 4 hours, right? With nothing to do other than listen to all of this stuff. So were you able to sort of judge his reactions to what he was seeing? Because he's coming out now and saying, well, I never really believed it was aliens. I just went down to see what was going to happen, which is not what he was saying before he went down there. I'm just curious as to what his body language was like. Did you observe anything, any impressions about what Dolan was thinking or how he was reacting to the presentation as it went along?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that, I don't know whose idea was it to ask the presenters to stay all the time on stage, instead of, showing one by one and let them have like a cigarette break or a bathroom break. So I don't know. I mean, Greg Newkirk, is a buddy of mine. He runs the website Who Forced It, right?
Yeah.
He was the first ones who started to write about the slides and his impression. He watched the whole thing with the live streaming, and he said that he felt that Dolan looked embarrassed, right? Like Dolan looked like he really was uncomfortable being there and speaking after seeing the slides. But then I wrote a comment on his website and I said, well, who knows, right? Because you said he looked embarrassed. Maybe he was just tired, Maybe that was tired after 5 goddamn hours sitting in that goddamn chair, Maybe the man was just, who knows how early he got up that day. So it's difficult to ascertain, but I can say that most of the time he remained completely still, listening to the persons who were speaking, next to him, never turning his head, just listening with his eyes closed, absorbing it all, not really moving from his seat. So
he wasn't sleeping, was he?
No, I don't think so. So who knows, right? And let me also point out that I think it was Thursday. I got to talk with Gene Steinberg and Chris O'Brien. They wanted to interview me for the Paracast.
Yeah.
And Gene managed to have Richard Dolan for a few minutes.
Yeah, how did that go?
Well, it was interesting. Richard was.
This is before the big news hit.
Yeah.
This is before our research hit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this was before the big reveal that the placard had already been deciphered. So, Richard kept saying that he felt that the forensic analysis was still compelling, and that he had asked Maussan and the other organizers that they needed to release high-resolution versions of the slides and along with the forensic report as soon as possible. So in order for people to start the discussion instead of, what he complained were just attacks on how the whole thing went down, right? And one of the things that I asked him was whether he had actually managed to converse with Salce and the other experts privately during his stay in Mexico, and he said that he did, but because of the language barrier, apparently these guys really didn't speak English so well. The conversation was a bit limited, but nonetheless, he was still impressed with, especially with Salce. He really felt that he was honest. He was objective. And I must say, like I said before, of the three experts that Maussan presented, that guy was the one who kind of gave me a bit of pause, right? I mean, that one, I feel that by now the whole thing rests on his shoulders, right?
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. They referred not once to what was on the card, except for it said it was illegible. I saw one slide, I think Adam Gorightly posted it from the presentation, where it said illegible card. And that's all they ever said about it, right?
Oh, well, boy. Yeah, but the thing is that there are two slides, and I think that most of the analysis they allegedly made were on the first one, the one that was taken with flash on. I mean, I really, for a moment, I felt that they weren't really going to show the second one, the second slide. And I was even tweeting, what happened to the second slide? Where is the second slide?
Right.
And, by the very end of it, Maussan said, okay, so we promised that there were two slides. We're going to show you the second slide. It's the same as the first, but this one is much darker because it was taken without a flash. So they showed the image, and then it was kind of a funny moment, because Maussan looked kind of surprised, and he's even said on stage, now that I'm looking at it for the first time, instead of watching it from a computer monitor, I'm seeing that the image is indeed much clearer than I originally thought. So I think that, the whole thing is, my opinion is, if they hadn't found a way not to show the second slide, this whole thing that you are talking about, how everything crumbles so rapidly, would have indeed, stalled and maybe lingered for a bit longer, right? Because the second slide was really the cipher by which you guys managed to crack the whole mystery surrounding the illegible placard.
Yeah, and I think at this point maybe we can ask Lance to discuss how they came to get the image, what they saw in the image, and what was done to the image with the software, and what software was used, and how that was released to everybody so that anybody could replicate it.
Well, I should say that I really had nothing to do with the actual deblurring of the software. One of the team members, whose name that he goes by is Nablator, is the way I'm going to pronounce it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the correct way to pronounce it. He did the work. He got a copy of the placard that was in pretty good shape. It was blurry, but it still was in pretty good shape. I do not know how that happened, but he got that. So I came on to the group on Facebook, as I would do from time to time, and I saw this thing posted, and I looked at it for a little while, and I saw, well, Jesus, I can read that whole top line. So immediately I said, well, Are you guys fooling? Yeah, are you guys fooling around? Is this real? Or because believe me, we did a lot of. Everyone did these crazy drawings making fun of these guys, and just for our own amusement, we would put up things all the time. And I didn't know if this was real or not real. And I thought maybe somebody had just. I thought somebody had just mocked it up.
Friday morning, as people woke up and came on and just saw the post, they said, "Are you guys screwing around?" And it was like, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it surprised me when I saw it. That's when I kind of changed my mind and said, maybe this isn't as ridiculous and not as significant as I thought. Because if this is a true and, faithful representation of what was shown and everybody agrees it is, there's no real argument. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So we started looking at it, and everyone would try to just see if we could decipher other words, and then we also tried to replicate the results. And I explained it in that video, but the sort of the way that software works is it wants to know how the blur happened when the camera actually took the image. So it's kind of cool because what you're actually coming up with is you're coming up with the motion that happened right on that day, whenever it was. If it was Hilda Blair Ray when she snapped the shot, the way that her camera moved is what that sort of
there was no flash, so there was
model is modeling.
Yeah,
and so we would all, and that you have to do by hand. You have to kind of look at the blur that it gets on its own, the blur model that it gets on its own, and then you try to figure out. What of this is probably not real? What of this is clutter? And then you try to clean it up. And Nab Lator was really good at that. He came up with some really nice blur models. And then slowly I learned how to do it. And I came up with some decent ones, not as good as his, but some decent ones that could do the same thing. And Tim did the same. Tim Printy did that as well. And we knew we had something at that time. So then that night, so we're all doing this. So we've got this image that we don't really.
Hey, Lance, what's the software?
We don't really have provenance on, right?
Yeah, Lance, what is that software? Is that a freely available?
It's called Smart Deblur.
Right.
And we were using version 2.3. So that night, this whole thing goes on all day, and it was so much fun. And I hope we can talk later about just the way this group worked and how it seems to be sort of a model of if you want to find out facts about these kinds of things really fast. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, crowdsource it.
But the thing is that Paul came in and he really sort of chastised us all because we didn't really have provenance on this image. We had the image. We were pretty sure it was that it was the same thing that they were promoting as the slide, but we weren't sure if it was really the slide, And so we're sort of all getting panicky, and I went in and I took some of the images that they had released because Richard Dolan released an image of the slide to Coast, as I recall.
Right.
Of the other slide.
And then and we were able to sort of try to match that up and see if if the text, the sort of blurry text, matched the blurry text on the images that we knew were real. And then miraculously, that Adam Dew guy put up the actual placard on his site. So that really saved us because we didn't really have anything that we could absolutely say was that we could lock in on. This is what they're showing us the slide.
This is from the source. Yeah.
And it's important to note that he put it up at the same time as he said we had faked the results. We had photoshopped it and we had faked our version of the slide. And he said, look, I'll prove it to you. I'll put the drum scan of the actual slide up online, to which we all went, well, thank you very much. Because
now
was the final
scan. Yeah. Go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say it was sort of the final self-destructive step that they took on their journey to having it all fall apart. Because at every step, if he hadn't done that, it would have made we were having internal debates about what we could release and what we could say. Tim Hebert or Herbert That sounds like, sorry, I sound like Ernie there for a second. Tim, however you pronounce his last name, and I and Chris Rukowski, I think, were chiming in too, had some concerns about the provenance. And then Adam Dew just made it easy for us, because now if we can replicate with this slide that he's provided, we're done. And that took all of 10 minutes?
Yeah, so bravo for Adam Dew.
His slide was, unfortunately, it was not as good as the other one we were using. It was somebody had done some manipulation of it to make it not anything nefarious necessarily, but they increased the contrast on it.
Yeah, they were probably just trying to make it look good for their presentation.
Yeah, and it had possibly had some sharpening done to it, and that might have killed some of our data for the blurring.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, NAB was really quick on getting and my memory is that it took a longer amount of time for us to maybe the next day, because those guys in Europe were all asleep. So we went to sleep. We went to sleep that night. We went to sleep that night, and we knew that we had the right. We knew that we were locked in on their real thing, but we couldn't demonstrate it that well until the next morning.
And people were screaming. Yeah, one of our images leaked out, and I made the decision, perhaps wrongly, to go ahead and publish our material before, these accusations and spins. And, it was tough. Everyone was gone to bed. And so I slapped something together and got it on. And, but then the question, they said, where the hell did you get this? And we said, well, it's real, but then we were in a rather tough spot. But, as Paul said, Adam Dew came to our rescue. Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah, bravo for his openness.
He was saying we were liars, hoaxers, and fakers, he came to our rescue. The irony was not lost on any of us, believe me.
And I want to say that software, if I had opened the image up and just done the deblur and just let it do its own thing and not really understood how the software worked, I probably would have given up too. And I think David Rudiak, for instance, said that that's essentially what he did. He got the stuff a long time ago, and he couldn't make heads or tails of it either. But because NAB had gotten such good results, I knew it was possible to do it. So I didn't just quit the program like I would have if I'd done it on my own. I stuck to it, and then finally you could see, okay, so this is how it works. This is how you get results from it. And so that was all. That was just all in that one afternoon. It was so much fun.
You were sweating, and Prenti was sweating, and NAB. I mean, it was really a frenzy, because we were under a lot of pressure. It's like, hey, this is kind of like this is like a Apollo 13 or something. We're struggling with this technical problem, and I was left out. I have no facility with this at all, and I was trying to clean up our documents and stuff like that, and organize some things, and it was a mess. But things, you could see that we had it. We had, how do we put it together where we can show people? And then we started talking about a video demonstrating the step. And then, of course, that's something else I couldn't do or explain. But, I know if you have the video, people will see it. And, so then we started talking about, okay, we've got it. How do you teach people, to do this? And so we brought in, and a few other people seeing our early work. There were some independent attempts, and they were getting something. So, it wasn't, this wasn't some fantasy. This wasn't like a matter. Oh, actually, before there were two things before the show. First of all, they said that the placard was handwritten in red ink. That didn't turn out to be true. The other thing was they said that they had four experts, and I don't have their names handy, but David Rudiak was one of them, the National Photographic Interpretation Lab. Oh, I do remember, Studio Macbeth and Adobe were all had been given high-quality copies of the scans and now analyzed it and failed to produce anything. However, Tom Carey, in an interview with Maussan ahead of it, he said that I can tell you now that some of the words are legible, and debunkers will be disappointed. So he indicated that something was clearly there that was going to show us that this was supporting their Roswell theory. Right. That's another interesting thing. They always build this as Roswell, and somewhere along the line they backed off of this, and they said, well, this is an alien, and we can't show for sure that it was in Roswell, but the whole narrative originally was Roswell, and these guys were the Roswell investigators. And that was a peculiar change in the narrative and really the advertising too. The other thing about so then right before the show in another interview, Don Schmidt comes on and he mentions the consultants and that they had all looked at this information, but it was beyond the pale, that nothing could legibly be read, and that all that could be done was you could try to interpret something, but it was the letters. It was he said beyond the pale, couldn't be read.
And then I think Anthony Bragalia came in with some information that it something to do with a guy involved with UFOs, that they could read the name, and it had to do with maybe somebody at Wright Patterson. I can't remember the exact narrative, but it was something like that you could read a name that had something that we would have been disappointed in. And Kerry was right. I was disappointed, but I was disappointed in him.
So when you de-blur this thing, which people can do for themselves and replicate very easily, I think Paul or somebody or more than one person in the group said it must be something that is very easily seen or replicated or can be done by just about anybody. And you accomplish that. What does it actually say?
I don't have it handy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to pull this up. I'm really embarrassed to tell you this. Okay. Well, first of all,
we're just talking. I can pull it up too, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. We'll go ahead and do that. Well, so initially, this I'm getting ahead of this story, but the thing that you can read most easily is the top line, because it's written as if it were a headline. It's in all capital letters. And then there's some other things that are more difficult to pick out. And so we had some X's, some things that are as placeholders.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you can read other than the top line is San Francisco, California, including you can see the comma clearly between the two words.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, do you have the text?
Well, the top line of the text. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do too. Go ahead, Lance.
Okay, so the mummified body of 2-year-old boy, that's the thing that we really knew. That just stands out just as clear as day.
Yeah, block
Particularly,
letters.
the word mummified is perhaps just slightly less clear than the rest. But body of 2-year-old boy is super clear. And San Francisco, California is really clear. We surmise that it says, at the time of burial, the body was clothed in a slip-over cotton shirt. Burial wrappings consisted of, and we thought it was these, but it may be 3. Burial wrappings consisted of 3 cotton blankets, loaned by Mr. Blank. We weren't sure, and there might be some initials there. San Francisco, California.
Right.
And then, no one believed us.
Yeah.
Bill and Harris said it was a fake. Adam Dew said it was a fake. And everyone said that we had photoshopped this, and there were a number of accusations, and people said, well, these guys have, it's like Paul had joked about his the thing on May the 4th. Is this another one of your stunts? So there was and Anthony Bragalia has, he doesn't believe anyone that doesn't agree with his point of view. So there were all these accusations, and of course there's some diehard believers that anything that challenges their alien Roswell narrative, and also these guys have their fans, their fan base was supporting them. So there was definitely some controversy. So but at this time, we had that, and there's the software. We're starting to share that, and other people are producing the same results, and that's when the tide turned.
I got a letter from Bragalia the night after we first released the idea that we'd come up with the text, and he said to me, Curt Collins has photoshopped. This is in an email. Curt Collins has published a Photoshop fake placard. It's a hoax used to discredit the slides, and this is easily provable. Tomorrow, you, your group, and Collins will be exposed for perpetrating this hoax. The placard says the placard says nothing whatsoever about a 2-year-old mummy boy. This is entirely made up and has somehow been inserted into the real placard. Enhancements, enlargements, and color contrast of the real placard will prove without question that you have either created or you have distributed this hoax to defame me and the team. This scheme will backfire on the anti-sliders group and will prove that you and your group employ tactics to include lies, fakes, and intimidation of witnesses, scientists, and presentation guests to discredit.
I realized, wow, you couldn't make a more ridiculous statement that in about 8 hours is going to really make you look foolish. And that's exactly what happened. And, you know, now he's even Bergalia, which it's kind of like when Berlin fell at the end of the Second World War. You know, when Berlin falls, you know you've really won. Well, he was Berlin, and even he has published sort of a cheesy mea culpa that isn't really a mea culpa, but at least he admits that he was wrong and that we were, you know, this is actually...
That was a pretty good mea culpa to me. I read it.
He is a good researcher in some ways. I mean, he can definitely find documents. And I think what he did was he entered in, once we had found the plain text of the placard, I think he entered it into Google, which I had meant to do, but I was so busy doing so many other things trying to be sure we had our provenance straight and do that video and so forth. He entered that in, and he had a hit and found out a match that showed, yes, we actually know where the mummy is, where it came from, you know, we know the whole backstory on it now. And I'm not sure all that people are still going on and on about that. I don't even think that's important anymore. I mean, it's
kind of important because you get that text, you can't read it, but you have the San Francisco, California. And what he found, I think that he found, or at least an Italian researcher and also Micah Hanks independently found, was a note from the National Park Service from 1938, which read, and this is the text that's relevant, a splendid mummy was received by the Park Museum recently when Mr. S.L. Palmer, Jr. of San Francisco returned one that its father had taken from the ruins in 1894. The mummy is that of a 2-year-old boy and is in an excellent state of preservation. At the time of burial, the body was clad in a slip-over cotton shirt and 3 small cotton blankets. Fragments of these are still on the body. That is from the National Park Service in 1938, September 1938.
Look,
I didn't realize what happened.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The only thing
go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say the only thing I'd like to add here is that eventually, and by eventually I mean very quickly, would have been found by anyone who was looking for it.
Right.
I'm a little less charitable towards Bergalia because I don't think he should be given credit for finding something that would have been found very quickly simply because he was the first guy to go look for it after we had already done the heavy lifting, after he had spent 3 years, you know, insulting us and being really the lead guy for putting out all of these crazy theories and the narratives that went with them. So he doesn't get any credit for me. He might from somebody else, you know, but not from me.
Greg, have you noticed that Paul's become a worse skeptic than me, more hardcore?
It's true. And I promised Adam Grow Rightly I wouldn't say anything personal about anyone, but that's my one exception. I will say I don't think his mea culpa was a mea culpa at all. I think it was something that was forced on him. He had no real choice because he had been caught out. And, you know, he didn't apologize to any of us. He didn't say anything other than, I'm apologizing to the body of the 2-year-old mummy boy. Which, you know, I'm pretty sure the 2-year-old mummy boy didn't really care about the apology, but those of us that were smeared by Tony might have, you know, appreciated an apology. Didn't come. So no credit from me. That's all I'll say.
I just want to say about that statement, though, the one good thing about that was that allowed him to find that text and match it. And with his ego, that convinced him it was true. If someone had shown him that, he would have denied it. But that's like a movie moment. You know, that had to have hit him in the gut. It's like, damn.
But I guess we can take some small pleasure from that. But I mean, at the end, I've sort of said that he's now irrelevant. They're all irrelevant. You know, what's relevant going forward are the lessons that they don't matter anymore. What matters going forward is what we can take out of this episode in terms of how good research can be done in the internet era in the 21st century, how open sourcing and transparency amongst researchers is a good thing, not a bad thing. The secrecy that has fueled ufology for 60 or 70 years based on jealousy and, you know, trade secrets and greed, that has to be washed away. None of that was present with us. We were just sharing information left, right, and center.
Yeah.
And that's how you get to the truth. Well, that's the real takeaway about the Roswell slides story, and I think that's something that we can apply going forward to a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah,
which
well,
might make
you hope so.
This a useful exercise.
Well, you hope so. And the thing, actually, I think Lance actually pointed out that some of that is present in the hardcore skeptical community too, to some extent, where people don't share information and they pick and choose what they want to talk about and how they want to present their information. But like Paul said, and I've been whining about this for years now. Why don't groups just get together, form small groups, and do their own research? And when they're finished with it, share it openly and see if other people can replicate that. This is kind of in microcosm what you guys did in microcosm, as Paul is saying, what can be done. And never mind about slapping wrists or yelling at people or whatever. It's like, well, now a lot of people realize what's going on, I hope. And what they will do is maybe be a little bit more careful when they listen to, view, pay for, and discuss what's going on in the area of UFOs and how their beliefs are formed. That's a really important one. Is how does your belief determine what you're going to look at, and what does it keep you from? What kind of information does it keep you from looking at and keep you from accepting? That's my rant.
Well, and I would agree, and I would just say that if they had come to us, or if they had made it open. If they really have the secret of the century of all time, make it open, let people know. If it really is a space alien, I think I speak for Lance and Curt and everybody else and Phil, the Ghost to Phil class. We would be the first ones to say, bravo, okay, this is important, amazing stuff. Our world has changed. If they had done that 3 years ago, we could have easily shown them that was not the case. And it would have saved an awful lot of people, an awful lot of time, an awful lot of money. And frankly, it would have saved them from having their credibility severely damaged to the point of being destroyed in many cases. So those are the kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things you can prevent.
Yeah, by having a group like that, also it protects against the thing that UFO proponents claim is that skeptics, hardcore guys like me, their claim is that I'm a debunker. I get that a lot. I'm a debunker. If I saw real evidence, I would turn my eyes away. I would hide the evidence. Well, there would be no way for me to turn my eyes away from the de-blurred image of this thing because everybody was there looking at it at the same time, right? I couldn't have – and we had people from all spectrums of interest in the UFO topic and belief in the UFO topic. And so the mythical debunker couldn't ruin their day by hiding the information. If I don't think there's any such person like that. I don't think Philip Klass was like that either. But
no.
It's
I got a different opinion of Klass than you guys do. But go ahead.
The other thing that kind of got touched on with Red Pill Junkie's talk is how
he's still online, by the way.
Oh, great! Yeah, the idea of this sort of reverence for just the veneer of science. And that is really one of the most prominent things in UFO research is this pretend science. I did a lot of research, which nobody cares about Otis Carr, the con man from the late 50s. Yeah. Who said that he had the secret to building a flying saucer. There's still people who believe in his supposed ideas. But he would talk in a scientific way, a faux scientific way. And it must have affected people, and people must have believed it because they would give him money.
Oh, they gave him tons of money.
Same thing happens with like, for instance, this guy who came on and said that by looking at the slide, he can tell this Roswell slide. He can tell that the body was evolved as a reptile, like a gecko.
Stop saying that. I laugh every time I hear that.
It sounds so ridiculous.
He's trying to sell you insurance.
But it has a scientific veneer, and there's so many people who are interested in UFOs who just sit back. I know that, for instance, Ray Stanford or somebody like that has these pretend the same thing with the guys that do they call UFOs something else. They UAPs. What is that group? They write these faux scientific papers that are not scientific at all, where they're in the form of a scientific paper, but that's not what they are. They're a believer paper that doesn't explore, doesn't try to get to the truth. It tries to get at a predetermined result.
Yeah, there isn't a
that's the thing
falsifiable
that really hurts
hypothesis.
UFOs, if you ask me.
Yeah. No, we've all seen that for years. Where I spoke to Dean Radin, and he said he was tired of people using the scientific terms to explain psychic phenomena. Where he says he's been doing lab research for years and just starting to get, he was at that point just starting to get fairly good data that some of this stuff worked. And he said, we've got people going out there saying that they will tell you how to, what's that called? Psychic or whatever, flying, where you bounce around a lot and you can fly. And he said that's messing up all kinds of legitimate research because people will not pay attention to it because most people who consider themselves to be fairly, reasonable will not listen to all that stuff, and there might be a germ of something interesting in it, but because of all the BS surrounding it, it doesn't get any good minds working on it because the good minds try to keep away from it.
Right. It's funny. I would say, and Lance, was joking earlier that I've now become more evil skeptic than even him. And it's in a weird way. I was always a skeptic, but it was the best evidence film that really changed how I viewed skeptics, because Stan Friedman had sort of made me believe that all skeptics were at least a little evil. And the Phil Klass thing, Klass was both good and bad in equal measure in different ways. But with the best evidence film, those 10 cases, every time I challenged a skeptic to try and explain a case. In Lance, he and I went back and forth for a couple of years on the Kelly Johnson case.
Right.
Tim Printy, I challenged Tim Printy to try and explain the RB-47 case.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I agree with their explanations or disagree. The important thing was they made a good faith effort, which was a lot more deep than most of the UFO researchers' efforts that I had seen over 10 years, to try and engage and have a dialogue and come up with a reasonable explanation. And
right.
I went, whoa, these guys, yeah, that's how it should be done, right? I'm on the wrong side.
Well, skeptic is a bad word because people have they have taken it from the neutral meaning, which is what it should have. Mm-hmm. I am skeptical about this, to mean something. Debunker, too. What's the difference between skeptic and a debunker? Debunker means you're taking the bunk out of something that has bunk in it. And skeptic means that you are weighing evidence before a true skeptic is going to weigh evidence before they make a decision. And in some cases, maybe they can't make a decision, so they reserve judgment. That is a skeptical attitude. That is not a negative attitude. It is not a debunking attitude. It's not a wrong attitude. I think it's exactly proper to be that way. And also, like I said, importantly, leave yourself open to the undecided at this time, or not enough evidence at this time.
Can I ask Red Pill Junkie, is he still here?
Yes, he's still here.
What's the reaction been like in Mexico, especially with Maussan, in the last day or two? Has he addressed the work of our group, and is he doubling down and plowing ahead? What's he sort of up to? What's going on down there?
Well, I had a brief Twitter exchange with him this afternoon. As soon as I learned about the deciphering of the placard, I tweeted him and I said, the sign has been deciphered, right? And he decided to reply back today, and the Twitter says that the word mummified is not clear. It could say similar to a body of a 2-year-old kid. And when I said, okay, whatever, but that even despite the fact is that it's clear that some of the letters can be deciphered, instead of what you guys said that none of them could. And then he replied back and said, the placard evidence is circumstantial. The real evidence is the body, and it's not a 2-year-old kid.
That's exactly opposite of what it is. That's like 180 degrees opposite of what the situation is. Amazing.
Well, yeah, and then I told him, that you guys have released the forensic report elaborated by Salce, but it's only in Spanish. So maybe I myself, and maybe I don't know if Caravaca has read it by now, and said, when are you guys going to release it in English? And he said that, yeah, it's unfortunate that they haven't been able to do so, translate the whole thing into English. I wish we could have published it, published the translations.
Did you offer to do it for him?
No.
No, okay.
I told him, right now, the English-speaking skeptics are focusing exclusively on the placard issue. If you really want to change the conversation or change the narrative toward something different, you really need to get that translation as soon as possible. And then his last reply was, we are preparing a detailed answer. Patience.
Well, I'd like to see that one. I hope it's.
I
can't imagine what it would be.
I can also say that I also took the time to watch his Sunday TV program Tercer Milenio.
Yeah,
something I hadn't done in quite a while, and I didn't watch the whole thing. Didn't catch the beginning, but was basically a lot of patting in the back, right? Self-congratulation of the historic event they promoted. They showed Carey and Schmidt in what I assume was a pre-recorded interview, something that I assume was recorded the day after the event. And, Carey said that the skeptics by now are eating crow, quote.
Oh my goodness!
Boy.
Once
He's
again,
like that guy in Baghdad, the spokesman for Saddam Hussein, who kept claiming that the Iraqi army was making many victories against the U.S. army right up to the end.
Even as you can see American, Humvees driving behind him in the distance, kind of thing. Yeah.
I just got a message from our friend Walter Bosley. He said he was in that exchange with RPJ and Jaime.
Yes.
And Jaime, and ultimately, I got a reply from Jaime, at least considering that it wasn't ET.
Wow.
The thing that might be fun to watch is the internal implosion that will take place between the slide's promoters, because somebody is going to have to be held account for this. And it's probably not going to be Bragalia, whatever I might think of him. He's not the prime mover here. It's one of two suspects. It's either Maussan or it's Adam Dew. Carey and Schmidt as peripheral figures, but the guy with the slides is Dew. The guy who organized the event that took all the money from people is Jaime Maussan. Now, if Dew pulled a fast one on Jaime, then you can see Jaime suing Dew and saying, "Well, look, yes, it's not an alien body. You didn't give me all the information. This is fraud," and that. I can't see Dew suing Maussan because Dew's the guy left holding the bag. At the end of the day, here's my confident prediction. They will all throw Adam Dew under the bus. Bragalia's already started to do that. And when that happens, don't be completely surprised if you see somebody, for whatever reason, try and commence legal action against Dew for defrauding them. And then their claim would be, we're innocent victims of this Adam Dew guy. And that would be an interesting, fascinating thing to see. If I was, of all of the people involved, if I was Adam Dew, I would be the one sleeping most uncomfortably tonight, because he's the one where the legal problems might ultimately rest.
Right.
A UFO fraud international incident.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Well, Red Pill Junkie, can I ask you another question about when the slides first appeared on screen there for the first time? Presumably for many people, the first time seeing them, was there an immediate reaction to the sight of the image itself, or do you remember?
Well, I felt that everybody was silent. Everybody was really closely watching the slides. I really can't remember if there was some kind of, like gasp or something. But I really don't feel that way. I think that the whole thing came later when they started to go with the whole extrapolation of the data that the thing looked like a reptilian, and then my cousin said, see, oh my God, it's always pointing out to the reptilians. And I was like, yeah, maybe not, man. And so,
because
I'm
it's the image
sure.
to you, to anybody here, the image to me is just not very interesting. It's not. It's not a wow moment. When you look at the alien autopsy footage, you're pretty sure, well, that's not a human necessarily. That doesn't look human, regardless. So it's an interesting image to look at. Whereas this thing is like, well, I don't know. It looks kind of like a skeletal body to me. It never took my fancy in any way.
Do you guys feel that this could possibly then be tried to spinned as like something like the Lloyd Pies Star Child skull, and say, okay, so we don't have an alien from the Roswell, but we still have a pretty interesting mummy there.
Yeah, or they will say that that placard it's mislabeled.
Yeah, maybe, that the same way like, ancient aliens who say, look, they say this was like some kind of bird, but it was actually the model of an airplane.
Well, when I look at other mummies, it looks pretty similar to me. I don't see anything unusual about it, really.
Yeah.
No, and we now have a pretty good lead on what the actual mummy is, and we'll just, chase it down, find it. There's probably an image of the where the placard has led Micah Hanks and, yes, Tony Bragalia and anybody else who would have looked. So we should be able to, I would think, find an image or something that would show hopefully a picture of that mummy, and then, it's like, okay, game. Well, we're already at game, set, and match. But that's kind of like putting a cherry on top of the sundae. After that, I can't imagine. At that point, then you're into the weird world of, I've actually heard somebody, and I can't remember who today online, say that the placard was placed there as a disinformation ploy. I can't even begin to comprehend what they're thinking when they say things like that. But the military, of course, put the placard there so that when they showed people the top secret alien, it would say mummified body of a 2-year-old boy. Or
they also placed that Bigfoot head behind it, right?
Is that what it is, the Bigfoot head?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that it was apparent. We were all sitting there right after the reveal because we had some pretty good images then of the slide. And it's like, well, what is that hairy thing that's right behind the mummy?
Oh, yes.
Because we had never noticed that before. And then it starts looking really clear. I shouldn't say really clear, but it looks a lot like you're looking at a head that's turned to the other side of the case, possibly like a wolf or something. You get the sense of teeth down below, and you kind of get a sense of where the eye would be. And none of that is for sure, but that's what it looks like. And we never heard any mention of our alien also has a piece of hair beside it. That was never mentioned prior to us seeing the image.
I think Nick Redfern, actually, when he wrote about it and thought that it was at the mummy from the $1 Million Museum, that it might have been a monkey or something. Or
a moose, I think.
Is that what he said? And then I saw somebody else's analysis that said it looked like a seated chimpanzee.
Yeah.
A stuffed seated chimpanzee. But it would be interesting. The first place to look would be, the National Park Service in Mesa Verde, and what they did with that. Maybe there's some sort of a paper trail about where that thing is. Maybe it's still sitting in a case in a museum at Mesa Verde National Monument there in Colorado. Who knows?
Well, the documentation they found when the mummy was moved does mention a photograph. So presumably we'll have that photograph shortly. But like I said, some people are really going hardcore on that, and I'm kind of disinterested in that part of it now. I think there's only so far we can go.
Yeah, the thing is that the guy's name matches from the actual National Park Service news report. The guy from San Francisco, and it says San Francisco. And if you look at that, you're not sitting there trying to force a set of letters that match up with what has been de-blurred almost to legibility.
Well, like Red Pill Junkie was saying there, that the only way you can salvage this as an alien story is that in whatever the original date was, 1894, they found the alien mummy then, and so that's you've got to jump through hoops to get that story to work, and it's absurd.
I feel like we're in a superhero organization, Red Pill Junkie. I want to be known as Starhawk from this point on. So please just refer to me as Starhawk. Exactly. Maybe I can ask a question to all of you guys. What do you think this means for Roswell research? I use that in quotation marks, but feel free to take the quotation marks off. But what do you think it means maybe for the Roswell case, Roswell research, and ufology in general, if anything?
Okay, I'll go first. There's no connection to Roswell. It really does. The only thing is like the absolute incompetence of the investigators, or willful fraud, or whatever it was. People say that actually, Don Schmidt and Kerry said they say this will, excuse me, will sink Roswell if this falls. And there were some absurd claims about that. I don't think it matters about Roswell. I think it matters about the Roswell investigators.
Okay, Lance?
Well, for me, I've worked a lot on Roswell, and I've argued a lot with all the proponents, and I don't think there's anything to Roswell even interesting anymore, and I had to come by that slowly, because there are some good points in favor of something interesting there. So over time, I've gotten to this place. And I'd be willing to debate Roswell with any of the guy. I'd be willing to debate Kevin or anybody, because I think there's plenty of stuff that lay people can understand about Roswell, where you can show why it's very unlikely that the scenario that they put forward is real. The fact that the very best researchers we're told, Kerry and Schmidt, have shown themselves to be so terrible at research, it should be an underlining for anyone interested in Roswell of how weak Roswell is. And what most people don't understand is that all the many claims about seeing bodies and all that stuff, the big ticket items in Roswell, that stuff has all sort of disappeared. It's imploded because those witnesses, the star witnesses, the big guys who saw the bodies and saw the saucer and so forth, those have all dwindled down and disappeared because they were discredited, sometimes discredited by people like Kevin Randall. So that most of those are all gone now. So there's sort of a shell that's still built in the public opinion about that got its information a long time ago when those stories were big. But the real Roswell superstructure is skeletal. There's nothing inside. There's nothing holding it up. And I'm not going to get into any particular points about Roswell, but I think that case is a dumb case. It was interesting, but it's been shown to be, essentially ridiculous. And of course, I'm a hardcore skeptic. I'd be happy to debate anybody who thinks differently.
Well, we might set that up on the show sometime, because I'd like to hear it.
Sure.
Red Pill did not answer yet. Well, how do you think this will affect the whole Roswell industry, story, myth? What do you want to call it?
I don't know. I mean, my interest in Roswell started to wane down by the late 1990s. I think the process began when I read that Omni article about Roswell, in which the whole thing with the nuns, when Schmidt and Randall started to have their fight, and that's when I started to get away from it, The fact that I never bothered to read the Tom Curry's and Schmidt's book, Witness to Roswell, says something about my lack of interest about this case. So who knows? I mean, Kevin Randall and Stan Friedman managed to dodge these bullets, right? Their reputation is still pretty much unharmed by this event. So I think they will still soldier on, doing their thing with Roswell. But I don't know if the public at large will be willing to pay attention anymore. But that being said, we still have the 70th anniversary in 2017, and I kind of guarantee that there will be something by then, of someone trying to inject some fresh air into that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. It's just not going to die. It's just got so much, what's the word? Momentum. It's got so much inertia behind it that in the popular mind, it's just it's taken as fact and gospel that something weird happened in Roswell, and for a subset of people that have heard about it that really haven't gotten into it that much, still think it's aliens were recovered from a crash vehicle in Roswell. I do not know. I'm kind of fairly certain that that's not what happened, but I'm also fairly certain that something important happened there that was very important at the time for some people, for the military especially. Past that, I have no idea. But yeah, the fact that they tried to distance themselves from that it was connected to Roswell is telling, and that they probably won't be invited to any more Roswell anniversary celebrations anytime in the future. But yeah,
never say never.
Yeah, the upshot of it is there's just so much inertia and momentum behind it that I don't think it'll ever die. I actually wrote I wrote something and Jim Moseley purloined it once. I took that Danny and the Juniors song and I changed it. Instead of rock and roll will never die, the Roswell crash will never die.
Yeah, and maybe Roswell will morph into something else. Maybe the extraterrestrial narrative will get discontinued, but some other more alternative narrative will start to get considered, like maybe Mac Tony's crypto-terrestrial idea. I think Nick Redfern wrote something for Mysterious Universe, saying something about that, how some people starting to consider the Roswell mummy as something to do with the Hopi legend of the ant people.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe something else will be replaced. Or instead of extraterrestrials and Nazi recovered technology, we'll get something else.
Yeah, even our friend Walter Bosley, who's still sending me text here, he wrote something a few years ago for Fate about what he said his father told him who was in the Air Force, that there was something going on at Roswell, had nothing to do with aliens, and it had to do with some sort of underground thing that was going on. So maybe it'll continue in that kind of a vein. So
I was thinking while I was swimming today that Jim Moseley would have gotten a big kick out of this whole thing. Oh, yeah. He would have enjoyed it.
Oh, he'd have loved it. Yeah. Yeah. You know what's funny about Moseley, and there's nobody like him anymore, is that he was equally beloved, I think, by total believers or total ETH people and 100% skeptics.
Yeah,
that's right. Hardcore, what I call them, and I don't know if Lance like this, but I use the term fundamentalist skeptic, where they don't really.
Oh, I thought you were going to say bastards. But
no. Yeah, the bastard skeptic. No, fundamentalist skepticism, meaning you like a believer, you basically just look at the information that agrees with what you already think and ignore anything else. Anyway, that's one reason why I really liked Jim Moseley and became friends with him, was that he was just he didn't care, and he took such a long view of the thing, and he'd been in it so long that you could ask him anything about it, and you might not like his opinion, but you couldn't really argue with it because he was so well versed in the lore.
Yeah, if I can answer my own question real briefly.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Paul didn't go.
Oh, no, it's all right. On the Roswell thing.
Yeah.
And I absolutely mean no offense to Red Pill Junkie as our Mexican representative here. But to me, Roswell has hit the end of the road. And one of the telling hallmarks is that it wasn't it wasn't in the United States or the United Kingdom, the places where Roswell has flourished for many years, that they took this. Eventually, they had to take it to new territory, relatively new territory. In Mexico, and it mirrors the pattern that you've seen in religion. As religion has died out in North America, the evangelicals have been making hay in Africa and South America, in areas that are perhaps a little less developed in terms of superstition and stuff like that, or at least moving beyond superstition. And it's really the last frontier for them. Jonathan Reed, same thing. After the Jonathan Reed story had played out in the United States, it found a new life, briefly, with Jaime Maussan in Mexico. And as soon as I heard that this was going to be in Mexico City, again, no offense to Mexico, but I realized they really are, they're like the Wild Bunch, on the run. So, or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid on the run, forced to leave the United States, which has been their home for 20 or 30 years, and take the story on the road to people that might still show up, as they did in Mexico City, and pay money to hear it. But eventually, you run out of places and you run out of people that are going to listen to your story. And I think that's what we're seeing with Roswell. I really do. I think we're seeing people aren't listening anymore. It had its high watermark in the 80s, and a few bad decisions by the promoters, latching onto MJ-12 and the conspiracy stuff. Now this, the alien autopsy, you find a series of bad decisions or bad things that have undermined confidence in it. And I think their audience is shrinking and will continue to shrink. It will always have an audience, but it will not be an audience that's anywhere near the mainstream, which was really where it was 20 years ago. When you think about
it'll never be as small as this podcast audience, though, right?
No, well, not my old podcast anyway. Unless I was talking about Roswell, and then it might be that small. You never know.
Yeah, well, it's funny Lance says that. It's funny that Lance says that, but I have more listeners live right now than I've ever had before.
Oh, good.
Let's talk about. While they're listening, let's talk about the aftermath of this. And there's been some people that feel like they've been cheated, and they think that Richard Dolan made the wrong decision. But there needs to be some accountability, and certainly the UFO researchers at the very least may have done some bad decisions. But there was money involved. This is a case of fraud. I mean, there's no getting around that there was fraud involved in this case.
Well, I'm not so sure that there's fraud. I mean, you can never underestimate how deluded people can be about this sort of religious aspect of UFO belief. I mean, I don't think we can say for sure that there was fraud. We probably shouldn't say that, in fact.
I agree. I think some people will allege fraud, but I don't think, unless somebody admits it or unless you take it to a court of law and can prove it, I think it's possible. I think it's entirely possible that this was fraudulent. But I also think Lance is right. It's possible that these people are just really incompetent and they're true believers, and that's a bad mix. History has proven that that's a bad mix. So I don't know if we can call it for sure fraudulent. Or it might be a mix of all of those things. Some fraud mixed in with some true belief. I think Anthony Bragalia, for all my criticism of him, falls into the true belief incompetent camp. I don't think he's fraudulent. I just think those are the other two things that he is. But somebody else, like somebody else in this story, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved. Maybe they were fraudulent, and it might be a mix of all of those things.
Do
and if
you
that's
think
the
that
case,
Maussan was fraudulent?
I think a lot of these
good
people
are his lawyers.
Yeah, I think a lot of these people
before I answer that.
listened to and looked at what they wanted to see and wanted to believe, and that's as far as I'm going to take it, because you can convince yourself of anything. And if there's an ego and a money thing involved, which should be taken right out of UFO research, then you can convince yourself that whatever it is you're saying, I think that's what the contactees did in a lot of cases. They confabulated a lot of stuff, and they basically believed it. They didn't think, I'm not lying to people, this stuff happened to me, or I think it was a dream, but it might have happened to me, so it's okay for me to say it. So
sure.
I'm trying to be charitable with a lot of these people you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is because, I mean, there's been a lot of accusations that Maussan did it exclusively for the money, and to me, I don't think that's really that simple. I think that he genuinely believes that he's really fighting the good fight, trying to uncover the truth. I think that he did it more out of a sense of protagonism, going down in history, being the only person able to fill out the National Auditorium with a UFO-related event than, doing it for a profit. And I think that he gave an interview to the British tabloid, the Daily Mirrors, claiming that he lost $100,000 out of this, and maybe he did, or maybe he just broke even. Like you guys said, maybe the only guy who really had any real profit was Adam Dew, because he was the one seeking someone to pay, give him the kind of monetary compensation he was looking for. I think that he gave an interview to Alejandro Rojas of open minds saying that an American magazine was willing to publish the slides a year ago, but because they weren't going to pay him, he turned them down.
Which is an admission I would never have made if I was him. I mean, just that's even if it's true.
There you go.
I wouldn't admit it. That's but even in his case, maybe he's just trying to do what a lot of other people have done, which is make some money off of something. As a guy who's made money off of making UFO films, I have no problem with people making money off the subject. At all. I never have. What I have a problem with is people doing it dishonestly by lying. So it's like a preacher, right? There's a difference between a preacher. Assume you think that there's nothing to religion. There's no God. You can look at two different types of preachers. You can look at the vast majority. They're the ones who genuinely believe there is a God. And even if you disagree with them, you can say, well, okay, I respect your opinion. And then you find the hucksters, the snake oil salesmen that you see in the mega churches that drive the $1 million cars and all that sort of stuff. And they are frauds. And you can have both existing in the same sort of arena, and I think you see that in ufology. Greg's contactee example is, I think, a good one. Some of them were frauds, but some of the other ones, I think, genuinely really did believe it, even though it wasn't probably true. So, it's a little more complex than just saying all of these people are frauds. The problem comes that they should have known that the slides didn't show an alien body. That's should be the real takeaway.
Right.
Oh my God!
And the other thing I was hoping that that we mentioned is just this idea of, if you can get together with people to try to, it's so much better when you have people that are experts, or maybe not even experts, but just familiar with certain aspects of things that you don't know when you're doing any kind of research. Like for instance, I don't know anything about weather. So when I did this thing on the Kelly Johnson case, somebody brought up that maybe my weather stuff wasn't correct. I don't know if it's correct or not. I've written to people who are weather people, but I've never been able to get any good replies to find out if I'm right or wrong or they're right.
Hey, you know what, Lance? Send me that. I have to know. I have to know some weather because of the piloting stuff. So maybe let me take a crack at it.
Sure. Yeah. But by doing it in a crowd way, by doing it the way we did it with the slides, it was so nice to be able to have several different people looking at things. Sometimes it was messy because we would all go off on our own, and sometimes we'd replicate the same results without needing to and stuff. But it was still kind of cool to have people who were good at something be able to, give their input and help out. We had a guy, Tim, for instance, who knows a lot about anatomy, who was able to look at the body for us and give us some advice on that. I remember, I'll mention Otis Carr again because I know everyone's riveted to Otis Carr. But when he was on the Long John Nebel show and he would do this scientific talking,
you can hear that online, actually.
Oh yeah. There's some great things. He would often talk, and people, the people who don't know anything about these terms, they can't come back. But there's a great episode where he was on with the great science fiction writer Lester Del Rey, and Lester was really smart, so he could go back and forth right away with Otis and make him look like, expose what he was saying as false.
Yeah,
that's kind of the thing that you get when you do this sort of crowdsourcing of research. You can get people who, from all different walks of life, who know something that you may not be familiar with, and can give you that input. And that's why it's so valuable. That's why it was so cool the way it all worked out.
Okay, we got to wind down here. Paul, did you want to ask something? I had a question about that.
Sure, I was just going to agree with Lance and say it's also important to note that we didn't always agree with each other.
That was my question.
There were members of the group who, for instance, were not comfortable with my May 4th joke. I think most people were cool with it, but there were a couple that indicated to me that they thought that was a mistake. And, when the provenance thing came up the other day, Tim and myself, and I think Chris maybe too, raised the provenance issue more forcefully than others had. And, so there was always, nobody ever got their nose out of joint, though. Didn't take it as a personal insult or anything, didn't necessarily agree. I mean, I went ahead and did my May 4th thing anyway as a joke, but, at least I didn't mind that people raised it and said, well, okay, maybe fine, I value your opinion. So that is so different from the way that we're learning the slides promoters operated, that I think that's, it's night and day. And you can see real research on a relatively penny ante subject, but real research done in a collegial way in our group, and in their group, I don't even know what you would call it, but it's not real research, and it's emerging was not collegial either.
You mean cordial or collegial as in college?
No, collegial, in the sense that everybody was being open and honest with everybody else, and that they were all they're all singing from the same hymn book.
Because looking at I went through all the back and forths. I was reading them, not really reacting, and I noticed there wasn't any horrible dissent. It was just kind of like, have you worried about this? Have you considered this? It's really important that we have, we cover this aspect so that it doesn't look like we're messing around, which I thought was good. And I'm glad it was coming from within the group, so there's a self-policing going on.
I'll also say this is my final word, and then you guys can wrap up, but I'll also say I think it was important that we also had a sense of humor about it. But, to have a sense of humor about it, realize this is not the be-all and end-all of the end times and the death and life of the world or whatever. And I think
or a UFO study, for that matter.
Well, yeah. I think that's in contrast, again, to the slides promoters who... what was it? The very name, Be Witness 2, the most important event. And Bragalia would continually go on that this is going to change the world and blah, blah, blah. And it's like we were going, well, cool, if that happens, I think I'm along for that ride. But otherwise, let's surf the wave and have some fun while we're doing this.
Yeah, and the other thing is if you do in these small anonymous groups, at least, and private groups, you can be loose with people and get that's the glue kind of that holds people together. And then when they present what they want to present, they're, even though you have dissent within the group a little bit, you're pretty much together on what you want to say. I mean, when people write scientific papers, they do the same thing, or historical papers or anything. If there's a few different people writing it, they talk about their dissension and about what, the problems that they had within the group, and how they came to a conclusion in spite of that. And that's missing too, I think.
Exactly. When Curt indicated earlier that he thinks he jumped the gun on his original post about the de-blurring. And he and I had a little, Curt, you probably remember this, had a little back and forth on Facebook between ourselves. And then Curt posted something on the Roswell Slides group page saying, Paul, would you like to write sort of a counterbalance to this or whatever it was? And I didn't. I said, no, Curt, you've done nothing wrong. It's just I might have been slower. Yeah. But, Curt didn't jump up and down and scream and defriend me on Facebook. He actually went out and said, look, Paul, would you like to write something? And I assume Curt was meaning on his own website or his blog and saying, look, to offer a different opinion. And I said, no, we're cool, Curt. But we had that conversation amongst ourselves, and nobody's feelings got bent out of shape, or nobody was called an alcoholic or whatever. So
I've had the same.
Well, it's true. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. At the end of the day, what we did was fun, and I don't get the sense from the slides promoters that they had any fun.
Well, I have had the same thing with Curt too. In fact, like I said at the beginning of the show, hardcore type skeptical people used to kind of frighten me. I guess they kind of do still, but the thing is, how do I get what conclusions I've come to challenged unless I have it by somebody who is not involved with anything I'm doing and comes into question it? I have to prove or, shore up my opinion, my research, or whatever it was. Curt actually sent me something privately a few weeks ago about some research that I had done, and I disagreed with him on it, and he said, would you like to change what I said, or would you like to argue with me about it or state your case? This is exactly what happened. But he took my comments to heart, and he changed what he said to reflect what the research that I had done. I have had the same kind of arguments with people that in the UFO community, and they freak out. Some people, not all of them, some of them. It's not terrible to disagree with somebody. It's not even terrible to vehemently disagree with somebody. You just have to be civilized about it and either agree to disagree, or one person or both have to change their opinion slightly. And I don't know why that's such a scary thing. Apparently, it's a scary thing in a lot of areas of public discourse now. So it's not just ufology.
Well, I think that when someone comes up with an idea or claim, a UFO claim, I think their first inclination ought to be, let me find the person who is most likely to have some counterpoint to this. Let me get as much counterpoint as I can. And that almost never happens. You know, when David Rudiak was talking about his work, he was supposed to try to do some of the image work. The first person he went to was Frank Warren. Well, I wouldn't have gone to Frank Warren. You know, it's the wrong. It's just not the way of getting the best result.
Yeah, go to somebody who scares you.
What's that?
Go to somebody who scares you.
Yeah. And he and I have communicated a lot more, and I hope we can work together on things because I think he's more open to that than some other people.
Yeah.
I was going to, because this thing is going long, who knows how long it'll go. I was just going to mention
we'll wrap it up
a letter that I wrote to one of the Slide team. I wrote back in February, and you can guess who it is. I wrote, now this has been February 4th, I wrote, now let me suggest to you that you should prepare yourself for this whole Slides thing to implode. I don't know anything for sure, but I would guess that someone's going to find the true source of the figure in the images. And I know this will be disappointing to you. If not, then great. It's an interesting story no matter what. But all the wrong people are involved for me to think that anything earth-shattering is going to result from it. So that was something I was trying to be kind. But, of course, the response I got was, you're an idiot and you're the one who's going to be embarrassed. So
instead of interesting, I will take that under advisement. Would probably be
right.
the worst thing he could possibly say to you as a civil response.
Right.
I was so disappointed with this because I thought that, well, first of all, there is not, as far as I can tell, not a shred of their story held up. And I thought that there was at least something genuinely interesting in this. And everything about their presentation was known before. I thought they had some aces up their sleeve, but there was, other than the slides themselves, in which are just clear, but there were no significant details about, the meetings with the Eisenhowers. And there were a number of extraordinary claims that were based on the most, superficial evidence. They had a picture of Eisenhower on the back of a train at a whistle stop tour, and somehow that became a connection that they had military connections and were ushered into the secret hangar where the aliens were. And it was it wasn't as good as the craziest Jack the Ripper identity, thing where, it was the Royals or something. I mean, it was so sketchy and things were miles apart. And yet, because it needed to be Roswell and it needed to be 1947, there was this incredible leaps. And there were several more that I'm forgetting, but it really is, it's going to be incredible to go back, retrace the story, the claims that were made, versus what we know now is, well, very little evidence. And the thing is, if this had remained an unknown, there would be almost some value in it. But I mean, just, if this was like a financial thing, this is like a $2 million swing. I mean, this wasn't a skyscraper that now you have a flat earth. This left a crater. I mean, it is, a disaster.
The person that's been on with us and not had as much chance to say anything is Red Pill. I will ask him as the last question: how do you think this is going to affect things and change things if if there's no reaction or not a ace up the sleeve reaction as Curt suggested?
Well, I feel the people involved will try to be on denial, right? They will try to say, I mean, I perfectly see Maussan saying, no. I mean, what I showed was the real deal, just as the monkey he showed in 2011 or whatnot, was also the real deal. I mean, he's still defending Jonathan Reed and Billy Meyer for crying out loud. So, that says something about the man and his adaptability, to keep being on denial. As for the rest of the people involved, who knows? I mean, I'm sure they will manage to justify them in their eyes why they did what they did, and their motivations and all that. I wanted to ask something to Paul. So who knows if Adam Dew is still planning to release his Kodachrome documentary? But what about you? Do you think that you might be willing to do a documentary about this whole thing, about you guys and how you managed to diffuse the whole Roswell slide story?
Two things. First of all, somebody on the Radio Misterioso page just posted much do about nothing, which I think is hilarious. Steve Ray, I think that's hilarious. That's perfect. Secondly, no, I haven't made a UFO-related documentary since 2007. So, despite the fact I'm shooting a feature film this summer in a month, which hopefully Greg will be working on. So, I don't think there's enough.
But you will entertain. Oh, there could be. You'll represent us, right? I mean, this is like, there's all sorts of things about investigative drama and everything. We need to find somebody really handsome to play me, though.
Bruce Willis. It always comes down to, would I get paid to do it? In which case, sure. But I'm not sure there's enough material here, frankly. I do think there is material. I think the documentary that would be interesting would be to do about a 90-minute documentary and Errol Morris would be the perfect guy to do it.
Yes.
The guy who did Fog of War or the Fred Leuchter story, and deconstruct Roswell over the last 35 years. The people, the myths, how it all got built up, and the seedy side too, but also the belief side. I think that would be a really interesting film. And the slide story would be part of it. Stephen Greer's film would be part of it. MJ-12, all of that. That would be an interesting film. But an actual television documentary solely on the Roswell slides, not only would I not want to do it, I can't actually see what the story would be over even an hour. And I'm pretty sure Adam Dew is going to find out that there isn't much of a story left for him either. So my answer would probably be no, in all seriousness. But a Roswell documentary, now that would be interesting. If it was done sort of from a Benson Sailor, let's examine the mythology of how this was created kind of thing. That would be
without taking a point of view of whether it's false or true or anything like that. And Errol Morris is very good at that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Fog of War and Mr. Death, the Fred Leuchter story, those are two of the great documentaries of the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
So what you would want to find somebody, I would suggest, outside of ufology, and that I don't consider myself in ufology, but I would absent myself from that. I would say go find a filmmaker who has never even thought about UFOs before and let him have a look at it. I know some of those documentarians, so that's an interesting question. Maybe I could interest them in that kind of film. That I would produce it, but I wouldn't direct it.
Unless anybody else wants to say anything, I will thank Paul, Red Pill Junkie, Curt, and Lance for being on today and discussing what happened. Go ahead.
Just going to say, somebody get the website address to check out the work.
Why don't you give both website addresses? For the what's it called? Well, Dew's address and yours as well.
The one for the Roswell Slides Research Group, which contains the reconstructions of how they did it by Tim and Lance, as well as Kurt's general synopsis, slightly rewritten, is www.roswellslides, all one word, .com.
Does anybody know the address for the Adam Dew's site?
Slidebox Media.
It's just slideboxmedia.com?
Yeah.
Okay. If people want to see that their side of it too, that would be
and
in the interest of
Maussan's website is bewitness.mx.
That's right.
Don't forget to mention our motto, which I think Paul came up with, which is, of course, it's a mummy dummy.
Yes. I'm still selling swag.
And it's still Mother's Day, so it's appropriate.
There's a Twitter hashtag on that, so you might want to check out. I think it's, Yeah, so it's trending now.
But is hashtag be silent? I think that was one of those.
What about be refund?
Okay, guys, thanks very much. Paul has requested a song at the end here, and I'm going to play it. It's "She Blinded Me with Science" by Thomas Dolby.
All right.
Excellent.
All right, thanks so much, you guys, and we'll see what happens on the site here in the next few days after I put it up. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Thanks. So, thanks so much, Lance, Curt, Paul, Red Pill Junkie, and I noticed a couple of you are still online with me here.
I'm actually taking off because I want to hear Thomas Dolby.
Oh, okay.
So,
thanks so much. I'd like to thank my guests again so much for coming on, talking about probably historic thing that just happened in the last few days.